Halfway through Love Me Tender, Elvis stopped singing. The music faded. 25,000 fans held their breath. Under the hot arena lights of Indianapolis, June 1977, the king stepped to the edge of the stage, eyes locked on a small figure in the front row, struggling for breath. Before we continue, if you love true stories that show the heart behind the legend, subscribe so you never miss moments like this where music stops and humanity takes center stage. It started with a blast of brass and the unmistakable voice that could make a stadium shake. The horns hit, the drums kicked, and the crowd 25,000 strong rose as one. Spotlights cut through a haze of cigarette smoke and heat, catching the white rhinestones on Elvis Presley's jumpsuit. Each stone caught the light like a camera flash. His cape flared as he stepped forward, greeting the audience with a half smile and a small wave. It was June 26, 1977, his final concert tour. No one in the room knew it would be one of the last nights they'd see him perform. The arena smelled of popcorn, beer, and warm electrical wires from overworked amps. Ushers in red vests guided latecomers down the aisles. The low hum of the sound system lingered between songs, a soft bed for the roar that erupted after every number. 3 songs in, Elvis was in his rhythm voice deep, hips swaying just enough to send screams from the upper decks. But his eyes, they kept shifting, past the flashing cameras, past the glittering posters waved by fans in the front rows. Stage right, in the very front row, a boy no older than 7 sat in a wheelchair. Clear plastic tubes traced from his nose to a small portable oxygen tank by his side. Every few seconds, the faint hiss of the machine cut through the noise, if you were close enough. Next to him, his mother clutched his shoulder. She mouthed every lyric, her free hand smoothing the boy's hair whenever the crowd surged. His cheeks were pale, but his eyes were locked on Elvis like nothing else in the room existed. Elvis kept singing, but between verses, he glanced back at the boy. Once, twice, a third time, something had caught his attention, and it wasn't letting go. The 4th song ended. Applause thundered through the arena. Elvis took a sip from a paper cup, cleared his throat, and signaled for the band to start the next number, Love Me Tender. The melody was slow, tender, filling every corner of the hall. Fans swayed, some holding up lighters. Elvis began the first verse, his voice low and warm. But by the time he reached the second, his tone shifted, softer, slower, almost hesitant. Halfway through the line, he stopped. The band kept playing for 2 beats, then faltered. Guitars trailed into silence. The only sounds were the echo of the last chord and the restless shuffle of the crowd. Elvis stood still, microphone in hand, his eyes fixed again on the boy, and then nothing. No movement, no note. The air in the arena thickened. 25,000 people leaned forward in unison, wondering what had just happened. In the front row, the boy blinked up at him. Elvis took a slow step forward, then another. The band froze mid-chord. A few stray notes from the piano drifted into the quiet before fading. 20,000-5,000 people in the Market Square Arena sat in an uneasy hush, as if the oxygen had been pulled from the room. Somewhere in the upper tiers, a fan coughed. Near the stage, the flick of a lighter echoed unnaturally loud. Elvis didn't speak. He didn't smile. He simply lowered the microphone to his side and raised his free hand toward the band. The gesture was small, but absolute. The music stopped. From the cheap seats, the spotlight made him seem larger than life, the rhinestones on his jumpsuit throwing pinpricks of light into the rafters. But up close, Those in the first few rows could see his expression-narrowed eyes, focused, almost concerned. He took one step toward the boy, then another. His white boots thudded against the stage boards. Witnesses later swore you could hear the wood creak under each step in the second row. A woman in a red dress craned her neck to see what had captured the king's attention. A young usher near the left aisle looked toward the band leader for cues, but no one moved. Elvis reached the very edge of the stage, directly above the boy's wheelchair. The boy's mother glanced up, startled, as if unsure whether to stand or remain seated. Elvis bent his knees, lowering himself until he was nearly level with the child. The gold fringe of his cape brushed the edge of the wheelchair. The boy's small hands tightened on the armrests. Elvis leaned in, resting one hand on the stage for balance. His lips moved, saying something too quiet to carry beyond the first row. Some recall it sounded like, "You doing okay, son?" Others insist it was simply, "I see you." The boy nodded, almost imperceptibly. For a moment, the arena felt impossibly intimate, like the only two people in the building were Elvis Presley and this child. Then, without warning, Elvis stood. His movements were sudden enough that the mother instinctively reached for her son's shoulder. He turned, cape swaying, and strode toward stage left. The crowd murmured. A ripple of confusion moved through the tiers. It wasn't unusual for Elvis to step off stage between songs, but mid-song, mid-love, me tender. That had never happened. In the horn section, a trumpet player leaned toward the trombone, whispering something with a raised eyebrow. Near the drum kit, sticks hovered over the snare, unsure whether to play. The lead guitarist held a quiet note, then let it fade to nothing. A few fans began clapping, hoping to coax the music back, but the applause faltered as they realized he wasn't coming right back. Elvis disappeared into the shadows of the wings, his silhouette swallowed by the darkness beyond the spotlights. For several long seconds, the stage stood empty except for the band silent. Motionless eyes darting toward the curtain. Somewhere up in the cheap seats, a man's voice called, "Come back, Elvis." The sound echoed strangely in the stillness. The boy's mother shifted in her seat, glancing toward the side of the stage, her brow furrowed. She whispered something into her son's ear, and he smiled faintly, though his eyes stayed fixed on where Elvis had vanished. Back on stage, the band exchanged uncertain glances. Elvis Presley had just walked out, and no one knew what he'd return with. He returned at all dot behind the curtain. The sound of the crowd dulled to a distant roar, like ocean waves pounding far from shore. The cool, dry air of the backstage corridors replaced the heat of the stage lights. Elvis moved quickly, his cape trailing behind him. Crew members froze as he passed, unsure whether to speak. Some say, he muttered, "The blue one," without breaking stride. Others insist he didn't say a word, just headed straight for his dressing area. A stagehand near the mic stand exchanged a look with the lighting operator. "Do we keep the spots up?" he asked. No answer came. On stage, the band began a quiet vamp, soft guitar chords holding a thread of sound in the massive room. But it wasn't enough to keep the tension from growing. The audience leaned forward, waiting for anything to explain the interruption. In the front row, the boy's mother adjusted the nasal cannula, making sure the tubing wasn't tangled. She kept glancing toward the stage entrance, her hand never leaving her son's shoulder. Near the soundboard, a security guard lifted his radio. "Do you want me to?" he began, but the voice on the other end cut him off. "Stand by." Elvis's dressing room was only a few steps from the wings, but every second he was off stage, stretched like a full minute in the minds of those watching. Inside, according to one crew member, he pulled open a small case and lifted something folded, shimmering under the dim bulbs. Meanwhile, the stage MC stepped out just far enough to peek through the curtain. The boy in the wheelchair was still. They're still watching the stage, as if believing Elvis would return any second. A trumpet player wiped his forehead with a handkerchief. "This ever happened before?" he whispered to the bassist. The bassist just shook his head. The murmur in the audience grew louder. In the upper deck, fans started calling Elvis's name. Some clapped in rhythm, trying to restart the energy. Backstage, a wardrobe assistant hurried toward him, holding an armful of scarves in different colors. Elvis pointed to one deep blue with gold fringe. He took it, ran it once between his hands, as if checking the fabric, then nodded. The assistant stepped back. Elvis didn't say thank you, but his eyes carried a quiet urgency. He adjusted the scarf over his forearm, squared his shoulders, and headed back toward the stage entrance. On the other side of the curtain, the crowd's chant grew louder. "Elvis, Elvis." The boy's eyes brightened, as if he could feel the moment coming. The guitarist's fingers hovered over the strings, ready to play the moment the star stepped back into the lights. And then, just as the noise reached its peak, the curtain parted. Elvis reappeared, something draped over his arm, heading straight for the boy in the front row. The crowd erupted the moment he stepped back into the light. It wasn't the usual cheer for an encore. It was relief. 25,000 voices releasing the breath they'd been holding. Elvis didn't wave. He didn't smile. His eyes were locked on one place: front row, stage right. The blue scarf with gold fringe hung neatly over his forearm, swaying slightly as he walked. He moved slower now, each step deliberate, like he didn't want to rush what was about to happen. The spotlight tracked him, cutting a sharp circle through the stage haze. Fans craned their necks, wondering who or what had brought the show. To a halt, he reached the very edge of the stage and stopped directly in front of the boy. The mother's eyes widened. She reached for her son's arm, steadying him. Without a word, Elvis knelt. The sequins along his sleeves glittered in the light, his white cape pooling against the black stage floor. Carefully, he lifted the scarf from his arm and draped it around the boy's neck. He took his time, adjusting it so it lay comfortably over the boy's shirt and didn't catch on the thin plastic tubing running from his nose. The gold fringe brushed against the boy's chest. The child's eyes widened, his lips shaping a silent thank you. Elvis smiled small, genuine, just for him. Then, with one hand resting lightly on the boy's shoulder, he brought the microphone back to his lips. The band, as if on cue, eased back into "Love Me Tender." The first notes were softer than before, barely more than a whisper from the guitar, and a heartbeat from the bass. And there, in the middle of the chaos of an arena concert, Elvis sang the final verse directly to the boy, not to the crowd, not to the cameras, just to him. The boy's mother began to cry quietly, tears glinting in the bright light. In the third row, a man lowered his camera, realizing this was something you didn't watch through a lens. Every few seconds, the faint hiss of the boys. Oxygen mixed with the music, two sounds blending into a moment that felt impossibly fragile. Fans around them leaned in, as if trying to hear every note, every breath. In the upper decks, people stood on their seats to see over the heads in front of them. As the last line fell away, Elvis let the final word hang in the air. The band stopped. For one long second, there was only silence. Then, into the microphone, he said, This one's our guest of honor tonight." The arena erupted. Applause crashed like a wave. Whistles, shouts, and cheers filled the space, echoing off the high rafters. But Elvis didn't rise immediately. He stayed crouched for a moment longer, his hand still on the boy's shoulder. It was longer than any stage cue, allowed long enough for the boy to smile fully, eyes crinkling at the corners. Finally, Elvis stood, giving the boy's hair a gentle tousle before stepping back toward center stage. The spotlight followed, but half the crowd kept looking at the boy in the wings. A stagehand watched with his arms crossed, shaking his head in quiet amazement. Elvis turned back to the microphone, lifting it with the same energy he had at the start of the night. "All right," he said with a grin, "let's give this place some rock and roll." The band exploded into the next song, but for many in the audience, the show had already hit its peak. What no one in the arena knew, what even the boys' mother didn't know, was that Elvis had just set something in motion that would reach their front porch days later. The ovation rolled on, but Elvis didn't hurry back into the spotlight's center. Instead, he crouched beside the boy again, ignoring the restless cues from the band. His hand found the boy's, and instead of a quick shake, he held it firm, steady, almost like an anchor in the middle of the noise. The boy's mother covered her mouth with her free hand. Her other hand stayed on the boy's shoulder, as if trying to make sure he didn't drift away from this moment. Elvis leaned in close enough for the mic to catch his words this time. "Friends," he said, glancing toward the audience, but never letting go of the boy's hand. "We're gonna make sure this young man always has a front row seat." The crowd answered with another roar, the kind that rattled the seats under your feet. But Elvis didn't milk it. He gave the boy's hand one last squeeze before rising to his feet in the wings. His manager, hair slicked, suit pressed, was already jotting something on a notepad. Later, crew members would say Elvis told him to take the family's contact information before they left the venue, back on stage. The band shifted into a mid-tempo number, and the energy began to climb again. But down front the boy sat motionless, except for the slight rise and fall of his chest. The scarf lay neatly across his lap now, his fingers curled around its fringe, like he was afraid it might vanish. His mother leaned in, whispering something. He nodded once, eyes still fixed on the man in white under the lights. From that point on, every time Elvis crossed stage right, he gave a little nod toward the boy. No one else might have noticed, but the boy did. He nodded back each time, a tiny exchange invisible to most of the crowd. Near the end of the set, Elvis returned to the mic with a grin. "Y'all have been a beautiful audience tonight," he said, voice carrying over the cheers. He pointed briefly toward the front row. "And I think we had the best seat in the house reserved already." The audience cheered again, some turning to see who he meant. Those close enough to spot the boy started clapping in his direction. And for the first time that night, he smiled really wide. The final song of the night hit like a celebration. Fans danced in the aisles. Scarves were tossed, autographs scribbled, hands clasped in quick shakes from the edge of the stage. But for the boy, the music was almost background. The real show had happened earlier, when the music stopped and the world narrowed to just him and Elvis Presley. When the lights came up, ushers guided people toward the exits. The boy and his mother waited until the crowd thinned before making their way toward the ramp. Several fans stopped them, offering smiles and kind words. One woman pressed a Polaroid into the mother's hand, blurred but unmistakable shot of Elvis kneeling beside her son. They had no way of knowing that this night wasn't over, The most unforgettable part wouldn't arrive until days later, and it wouldn't be in an arena at all. 7 days later, the summer heat pressed heavy against the small Indiana house. The boy sat near the window, scarf draped round his shoulders like a medal. His mother sorted mail at the kitchen table, mostly bills and grocery, flyers until her fingers stopped on a large padded envelope. The return address was printed in bold, Graceland. She called for her son, her voice catching halfway through. His name. He wheeled into the kitchen, eyes flicking between her face and the package. Carefully, she slid a finger under the flap. Inside was a layer of tissue paper, folded neatly. She peeled it back and froze. Nestled inside was a small acoustic guitar, child-sized, smooth wood gleaming in the sunlight. Taped to the strings was a folded note on cream-colored stationery. The Graceland crest printed at the top. She read it aloud, her voice trembling. "You'll always have a seat in the front row, Elvis." The boy's hand hovered over the guitar for a moment before he touched it, fingertips tracing the curves like it might disappear if he gripped it too hard, according to his mother. It was the first time she'd seen him try to strum a chord without help. His fingers fumbled, the sound awkward. But the smile that followed was instant and pure. The scarf from that night never left his room. Soon after, it was framed and hung above his bed, gold fringe still bright under the glass. But the guitar, he kept that in reach, leaning against the wall by his chair. In the years that followed, the family told the story often, how a stadium full of people saw the king stop a concert for one child, how he stepped off the stage mid-song, and how, a week later, a package from Memphis proved it wasn't just for show. That guitar still sits in the family's possession, today its strings aged, its wood worn in spots from small, determined hands. Some say Elvis gave away hundreds of scarves, and maybe that's true. But for one boy in Indianapolis, the night Elvis stopped singing wasn't about the scarf or even the guitar. It was about being seen. The music had stopped. The crowd had fallen silent. And in that moment, a superstar knelt down to meet him, eye to eye, as if there was no one else in the world. Sometimes a song ends, but kindness keeps playing. If this story moved you, share it with someone who believes kindness can stop a room. And in the comments, what's the most unexpected act of generosity you've ever witnessed?